unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live, Boxingego unpack. Yeah. We unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live. And it's still up. Jaron Boots Ennis says he still wants to fight Terence Crawford. Ain't nothing changed but the day of the week. Even though he's the IBF champion, newly elevated, he said he still want that rec, and he lists the opponents he wants to fight next, includes the name Terence Bud Crawford. That's what I want to talk about in this video. Stay tuned. Let's talk about it. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Gang, gang. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. It is free. Now, Jaron Ennis was elevated to the IBF champion in the welterweight division, 147 pounds. Me, I've already put out several videos about this, giving my thoughts. Jaron Ennis has also responded to this. In a new interview with YSM Sports Media, he says and proclaims that he still wants to fight Terence Crawford, right? He says he was asked about being elevated to the champion, and he says, quote, "It is what it is. The IBF, they abided by the rules," right? So he was basically asked about Terence Crawford got stripped, you got elevated. What do you think? He says, "It is what it is. It was out of my hands. It was in the IBF's hands. I'm the world champion now, and I'm ready to make these big fights happen and fight all those top guys. I'm ready to make my mark in this boxing game," right? Like I said, if I get my hands on one of these belts, it's over with. So now it's over. They might as well pack it up. They got to. You got to get in the ring with me. What's going to be their excuse now? And I think that's an excellent question from the young champion. What's going to be everyone's excuse now? I've got the belt. Come get the belt. What, the belt's not important now? We got to see what they're going to do. He continues and goes on to state potential future fights that he would like. He says, what's the first fight that's going to matter? Depends on what these guys are going to do. I heard something about Mario Barrios. I think they're trying to throw Barrios at me, right? So he's saying that's a name. He says anybody. Keith Thurman, Barrios, Stanionis, he's another guy. Bud Crawford, he's still another guy. Spence, he's another guy. So these are all the names he wants to fight. Even though Spence is going to 154 or whatever, I want to fight the best. I don't want to fight mediocre competition. I want to fight great guys, people with names that you know. So he was asked again after he said Crawford's name, it was reiterated, you want to fight Crawford still? He says, definitely. It's not the way we wanted to get the belt. We'd rather take the belt from somebody. It feels better when you take the belt from somebody. But, you know, the IBF abided by their rules. It was out of my hands. So this was great stuff from Jaron Ennis, well-spoken. And I told you my thoughts. I know some people are salty about it. I actually like the move because you have to look at the reality of it. You know, like some people, I've seen the argument, you know, the Bud Buddies, they've said stuff like, oh, but, you know, Crawford, he just got the belt in July and this is so sad and things like that. But here's the thing. Yes, he at the end of July, he beat Errol Spence, became 2X undisputed, has all the belts. So some people are saying it's premature that by November, he's already being stripped of one of his titles for not fighting his mandatory. But you have to understand that the mandatory was Errol Spence's beforehand. So Errol Spence, the whole world knew Errol Spence had Jaron Ennis as his mandatory, but then he ended up losing to Crawford. So he doesn't have any belts. So that's the only reason why Jaron Ennis isn't still the mandatory for Errol Spence, because he doesn't have a title, because he just lost his title. So in Crawford beating Errol Spence, guess what? he inherits those problems. He inherits the problems. It's like somebody sold you a car that was being leased, or, you know, you're taking over the payments. Guess what? You're responsible for the remaining payments that are left on the car. Or even sometimes in apartment situations, there's an early termination fee, or early, like if you try to leave and you're under a lease for your apartment, then they'll charge you, unless you can find someone who wants to rent the apartment, and then they take over like the rent, and then they take you off the lease, and then somebody else takes over. But you have to find someone to, you know, basically take over those payments. So that's the same thing. Errol Spence, he had the mandatory of Jaron Ennis. He loses. Terence Crawford inherits those very problems and the same mandatories. Furthermore, Terence Crawford, he let you know he had very little, we'll just say that, very little interest in fighting Jaron Ennis. He said, what's the point? It's a no-win, lose-lose situation. I mean, he's saying this in public interviews after beating Errol Spence. So that doesn't really sound good. And I know some people are using the argument of, oh, but he's contracted rematch clause to fight Errol Spence. But if you listen to interviews, Crawford, that's not what he was saying. He's not saying, when he was asked about Jaron Ennis on, let's say, The Breakfast Club, he's just saying, I'm after the bigger fights. And basically, Jaron Ennis, that's not one of them. He says he wants to fight Canelo, Charlo. He'll do the Errol Spence rematch, but that's what he's looking at. He literally said fighting Jaron Ennis would be a lose-lose situation. So if Jaron was already Errol's mandatory, he loses to Crawford. At what point would Crawford and Jaron Ennis, the mandatory, what point would they even fight if Crawford is telling you right here and now that he basically has no intentions, or he doesn't see the value in fighting Jaron Ennis? So I get that some people are saying, oh, you know, he was prematurely stopped, but not really, because at the end of the day, you would have just been stringing Jaron Ennis along. And I like the fact that it keeps the division moving. Crawford's already set history multiple times. He's been undisputed at 140 pounds. He's been undisputed at 147. So it'll just stagnate the division. We know Crawford's good. We need to see who's up next. And then the other thing is Crawford and Errol Spence, and possibly Crawford Spence too. They're talking about potentially doing it at a higher weight class. So with all these, Crawford not really trying to fight Boots because he doesn't feel it's a worthy fight. Errol, Crawford, the 30-plus-year-old guys in the division that are, I would say, an era or a generation ahead of Boots, right? They're talking about moving up and things like that. So you would just have Boots waiting, and being strung along for no real reason. Again, Crawford's already set his history. He's a person at age 36 or whatnot, 37, whatever age he is. He doesn't really need a belt to define him. You know, people have known the name since probably the Gamboa fight. We know he can fight. A lot of people, including myself, have him on the pound for pound list as #1. So guys like Jaron Ennis, they could use that because they're still building their resume. They're trying to get signature names. So that becomes almost a meal ticket for them to get and unlock those better fights. Crawford just beat the man of the division, a unified champion, a respected guy in Errol Spence. So he shouldn't really have trouble at age 36, 37 getting fights. But nobody was trying to fight Jaron Ennis. Now that he has a belt, people have no choice. You're fighting a champion now. So I like it. I've already said that. I stand on that. I stand on business. It makes a lot of sense to me. And I like Jaron Ennis, the way he's moving. He told you straight up, the IBF, they made the choice. It's out of my hands. That's the way the cookie crumbles. This is their rules. Of course, we would have preferred to get the belt in the traditional fashion by beating or knocking somebody out for the belt, but it didn't play out like that. So we move on and we still search for the big fights. And he says Crawford's still on the menu. I respect that. And for the Bud Buddies, this is what won't happen. I guarantee you. The Bud Buddies who feel a type of way and they're like, oh, this was wrong, they should have never stripped him. There's an easy solution here. Boots says he's still willing to fight Crawford. So if Crawford feels the type of way about not having all the belts in the collection, then you can make that fight. Crawford in the unified titles versus the new IBF champion. And we've seen stuff like this happen in boxing before. I remember when Manny Pacquiao fought Keith Thurman, he was the WBA champion. But then the pandemic happened, and then there was no actual fights happening or available to Pacquiao because the pandemic, there was social distancing, couldn't have big crowds. Pacquiao, his purse demands are probably up there. So you kind of need a crowd for Pacquiao's fight. So he was on the sidelines. So as a result, they decided to strip him and put him as a champion in recess because he was inactive during the pandemic. And then they elevated Yordenis Ugas of Cuba. And he was the interim champion, and he became the WBA regular champion because Pacquiao wasn't fighting. This is how it played out. So the great thing is when our society and things started to open back up to the point where we're making fights, they made Errol Spence versus Pacquiao. Errol Spence had to pull out because of an eye injury. So they decided to make the former WBA champion in recess versus Yordenis Ugas, who was the uplifted or elevated champion, right? And then now what that did was Ugas fighting Pacquiao. It solidified Ugas as the end-all be-all WBA champ because Pacquiao never lost his WBA belt in the ring to an opponent. He lost it basically on a technicality. So the same could be said for Terence Crawford. Crawford's still undefeated. Nobody beat him in the ring for the IBF belt. I get that. But just like Pacquiao and Ugas fought and provided clarity as to who should be holding that WBA belt, again, if Crawford felt a type of way, fight Jaron Boots Ennis. I would pay for that. That's a great fight. And then you could get the IBF belt back if you beat him or he beat you. And then now he's a certified champion with a great name under his belt like Terence Crawford. So either way, boxing fans win because I truly believe that'll be a good fight. And again, the Bud Buddies, they keep saying stuff like, oh, you know, he'll kick Boots up and down the street and all this type of stuff. Okay, fight him and get your belt back then. Very simple. You know, if you feel that, make it. And this is the thing I don't understand. You have the Bud Buddies who they say, oh, it's a pointless fight and this, that, and the third. How many fights did Crawford have with Top Rank that the world felt were quote unquote pointless? Even after Top Rank, when he did the one-off with BLK Prime, was that not a fight that people felt was quote unquote pointless? The David Avocado fight in Omaha, that didn't really do no numbers. That wasn't something that people were requesting and clamoring for. So it's funny that you see this with fighters where it'll be Canelo, and when you match Canelo with a tough fight that people in real boxing fans look at and say, hey, that's a great fight for Canelo. Canelo versus David Benavidez. Yeah. Canelo versus Jamal Charlo before his long layoff. Or Canelo versus Artur Beterbiev. Or Canelo versus Bivol rematch. Or Canelo versus Demetrius Andrade. All great fights, right? And when you say that, people say, oh, what has Andrade done? Andrade's resume sucks and this and that. And Benavidez, who's he beat? All these excuses. But then Canelo will fight someone that we know is lesser than Benavidez, that we know is a lesser talented fighter than Andrade, and he gets away with it. It makes no sense. So they tell on themselves. They are afraid. It is fear. Fear makes people do crazy things. you're not mad. All this, oh, Andrade ain't beat nobody. You don't care about that because you would never accept Canelo versus Avni Yildirim or Canelo versus Rocky Fielding. If you truly wanted to see Canelo fight the best and you cared who he was fighting and what kind of ticket sales they were doing and all these other excuses, then you would protest those fights and say, hey, I like Canelo, but this Rocky Fielding fight sucks. Nobody wants to see that, or the Avni Yildirim. But the Canelo Chupapi Muñeños, they're okay with Canelo fighting all these obscure European guys like John Ryder in Mexico and Avni Yildirim and Rocky Fielding and Billy Joe Saunders, all these guys, but then they have a million excuses of why the Benavidez fight or Andrade fight can't or shouldn't take place. It's the same thing you're seeing with the Bud Buddies. Crawford, he can fight Mean Machine, right? He can fight David Avanesian, no questions asked. But then when you throw Jaron Ennis' name in the mix, it's like, oh no, he'll destroy him. It's not worth anybody's time. So do you really believe that Jaron Ennis has a lesser chance than you thought David Avanesian had versus Crawford in Omaha? Come on. Y'all know the answer. I'm the best in the business, and it's not even close. We unpacked.
Introducing Super Thanks. Right here on the official Boxingego YouTube. Super Thanks allows you, the viewers, to show a little bit of extra gratitude, which enables me as a full-time content creator to push out the content you need in the world of boxing. Underneath all the videos, you will see a heart with the $sign in it. You can enter any amount that you find suitable as a super thanks. A brand new interactive and colorful way to get your comments highlighted and noticed by not only myself, but other people on the YouTube platform. Super thanks, a unique and cool way to show and applaud us full-time content creators. Hopefully you guys enjoy the content. Super thanks.
The future is now. The Hibernation 5s by Kenichi Bear. Hybrid gaming and lifestyle headphones. Out of the box, you can connect to any console or PC. Bluetooth ready with a low latency USB adapter, color RGB, and extreme bass mode. The Hibernation 5s adjust to you. Whether you need a gaming, travel, gym, or lifestyle headphones, the Hibernations got you covered. The new Hibernation 5s, link in the description. Customize the way you hear the world. Welcome to the nation.
Are you tired of your YouTube videos not getting any views? Well, consider TubeBuddy. I've used TubeBuddy for years to scale up my YouTube channel. Now we're sitting over 200,000 subscribers. TubeBuddy is a browser extension that offers a ton of built-in productivity and time-saving services to take your channel to the next level. Use my link in the description to get started with TubeBuddy and level up your channel faster. We working.